In New York, child support is calculated, there's a formula. So I could tell you the formula generally speaking, because there's some aspects of it that are a little bit complicated, but not overly complicated. I'll try to make it very simple for you. So in New York, the formula that we apply is we take a look at both parties' income. We look at the father's income, the mother's income, and then we combine them, and then we multiply it by a certain percentage depending upon how many children there are. For instance, if there's one child in the marriage, it's 17%. If there's two children in the marriage, it's 25%, and we go from there. There are some numbers that we can deduct from your income. For instance, we can deduct FICA, we can deduct Medicare, and we could deduct city taxes, not federal taxes. We get asked this question all the time. Also, what about your contributions to retirement? Sorry, that's just not part of what can be deducted. This is all by statute. So they take your gross income minus FICA, minus Medicare, and minus your city taxes, and we come out with a net number. And it's the net number for you and the net number for your spouse that they add together and multiply that by the percentage. Once they do that, that comes out with a number. And each of you, each parent, is responsible for child support. So the amount that would be paid is in proportion to your respective incomes. So to give a brief example, if your partner is making $40,000 and you're making $60,000 for a combined income of $100,000, I'm only using that number because it's easy for me to do the math. So in a situation where there's one child, again, I'm not taking any of the deductions out at the moment for purposes of this example, but 17% of 100,000 is 17,000. So how do you figure out how much you need to pay? So hypothetically, if you are the person making 60,000 and you're the one paying the child support, you're responsible for 60% of the $17,000 number. So you take that number and then divide it by 12, and that becomes your monthly child support number. Child support can be modified. So just because you went to court and you got an order of support doesn't mean that that's the number and that has to stay the number until your child turns 21. There can be modifications to child support number over the years. So in New York, we have a statute, and in the statute, it provides that child support can be revisited after 3 years have passed from the decision. It can also be modified if there's a substantial change in income by 15% or more, upward or downward, of either of your income. And we can go back to court and revisit the calculation to see if you still are paying the same number, or maybe the number be adjusted downward or upward. And lastly, if there's a substantial change in circumstances, so something drastic has changed. For example, I had a client that sought a modification of child support because the other parent wasn't seeing the kid that much. They weren't exercising all their parenting time. So all of the parenting time was now on one parent. And so the court needed to factor in that they were feeding the child 365 days out of the year, housing the kid, feeding the child, clothing the child. So all of these factors needed to be taken into account, whereas the other parent who wasn't exercising their time and obviously not feeding the child when the child was with them because the child was not, that's a reason to go back to court to modify based upon a substantial change in circumstances. You've probably heard the term deadbeat dad. Deadbeat dads are dads that aren't paying their child support payments. There could also be deadbeat moms, so let's not get too excited here. So with respect to what happens if a parent isn't meeting their financial obligations to supporting their child, and we all agree that your child deserves to be supported by both parents, just as much as they're entitled to be loved by both parents. So if one parent isn't meeting their child support obligations, what happens is that every month that goes by when these payments aren't being made, there is this accumulation of debt that just isn't being paid for. And so the parent who has a child and who's receiving the child support payments has an obligation to go to court and pursue something called arrears. So you can hold the other parent in default that they need to make a payment on their child support, tell the court that they haven't been paying, and you can get a judgment for all of the child support arrears that haven't been paid. And you can imagine that would be a lot. And if you get a judgment of child support for arrears that you haven't paid, that accumulates interest. So it's best to make the payments every month if you can. And if you're not able to make your payments for whatever reason, then you need to apply one of the terms that I had stated previously about modifications to your child support. So if there's a financial situation that's happening and you're not able to continue to make your payments, then it's important to get to court and tell a judge and try to get your child support modified. If you have any additional questions about child support in New York, contact Sabra Law Group. We'll be happy to have a consultation.